Welcome everybody as we continue our series on Daniel and Revelation. In this video, we're going to continue our study of Matthew 24, 2 Thessalonians 2, and the end time sequence by looking at the phrase Jesus used in the Olivet Discourse, when he said, "Because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold." That phrase matters a lot because Jesus places increased lawlessness inside the larger sequence. He speaks of many falling away, many betraying one another, many hating one another, many false prophets rising, and then lawlessness increasing so that love grows cold. So the question is this: what does increased lawlessness mean? Is Jesus only talking about ordinary moral decline? Or is he describing a breakdown in civil order? Is he describing spiritual deception? Or is he describing a post-apostasy environment where deception, betrayal, false prophecy, and lawlessness all intensify before the man of lawlessness is finally revealed? Those are the questions we're asking, and those are the ones we're going to answer through this discussion today. In Matthew 24, Jesus does not describe the end time crisis as a simple event. He describes it as a developing sequence. He begins with deception, false Christs, wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, persecution, and hatred. Then he says many will fall away. Then betrayal and hatred spread. Then many false prophets arise and lead many astray. Then lawlessness increases. The love of many grows cold. That order that he tells us matters. Jesus isn't just saying bad things will happen. He's describing an environment where external pressures produce internal rupture. The community fractures, loyalty breaks down, deception spreads, false prophecy gains traction, and lawlessness increases. Love grows cold. So the apostasy, which we already discussed in a previous video, and I'll put a link to it now, isn't isolated from what follows. It helps create the environment in which false prophets and lawlessness flourish. But what exactly is lawlessness? The Greek word for lawlessness is anomia. It doesn't merely mean no laws exist, but it does refer to an active disregard for God's order, rebellion against divine norms, and life lived outside faithful disobedience. But it also means to be in violation of the civic law, to be ignorant of civic law, and to violate the local and civic law. In Matthew 24, lawlessness is not just private sin, it has social consequences. Jesus says that because lawlessness increases, the love of many grows cold. That means lawlessness corrodes relationships. It weakens loyalty to each other, but it also weakens loyalty to the government in many ways. It makes betrayal easier against one another, but also against legal systems. It makes endurance harder. It turns communities inward, suspicious, fearful, and fragments them. So lawlessness is not only vertical rebellion against God. It becomes horizontal collapse against people and legal systems in general. And then it says, the love of many grows cold. And this is a sobering phrase. Jesus doesn't merely say that wickedness increases. He said love grows cold. That means the crisis is not only doctrinal or political, it's relational and communal. Love is one of the bonds that allows faithfulness to endure under pressure. And when love grows cold, people become more willing to betray one another, abandon each other, accuse one another, and save themselves at the expense of others. And this fits the earlier part of the sequence. Many will fall away, betray one another, and hate one another. In that type of environment, deception becomes more powerful because people are no longer anchored by truth, love, and faithful community. The apostasy hollows out the community, and lawlessness fills the vacuum. But that's not all Jesus says. Matthew 24 also says that many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. This comes after Jesus says many will fall away. That suggests a post-apostasy environment where false prophetic voices find an audience among people already destabilized by pressure, fear, betrayal, and cooled love. False prophets don't need to create the instability. They exploit the environment that they come up in. They step into the confusion caused by the apostasy event. They offer explanations. They offer certainty. They offer signs. They offer a way to survive. They offer a counterfeit interpretation of what's happening. This is why false prophecy and increased lawlessness belong together, and it's why Jesus does put them together. Lawlessness makes people more vulnerable to false voices, and false voices give religious or moral justification to the lawlessness. But still, Jesus has more to say. In Matthew 24, Jesus warns that false Christs and false prophets arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. And the Greek word for signs is semeia. The word for wonders is tarada. Jesus is warning that deception may not come only through words. It comes through visible power, spectacle, and sign claims. And this is important because many people assume that if a sign is real or impressive, it must be from God. But Scripture doesn't allow that conclusion. A sign can happen and still be false in its message. A wonder can be impressive and still lead people from God. And this is where Deuteronomy 13 becomes very important. Deuteronomy 13 warns that a prophet or a dreamer may give a sign or a wonder, and that sign may actually come to pass. But if that prophet says, "Let us go after other gods," Israel must not listen. The Hebrew word for signs is ot, and the Hebrew word for wonder is mofet. The key point is that even real sign does not automatically prove divine endorsement. The test is an allegiance test. Does the sign lead people to the Lord, or does it lead them away? Does it reinforce covenant fidelity, or does it seduce people into idolatry? And that principle is essential for reading Matthew 24, because when Jesus warns about false prophets performing signs and wonders, the issue is not whether people will see strange or impressive things. It is implied that they will. The issue is whether those signs lead people away from truth and faithful allegiance. But this helps us answer a sequencing question. Can sign-performing false prophets appear before the man of lawlessness is fully revealed? Yes. That does not break Paul's order in 2 Thessalonians 2. Paul says the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, and while the lawless one is still restrained from being revealed until his appointed time. So there is a difference between lawlessness already working and the lawless one being revealed. There is a difference between decentralized deception and the final centralized deception of the endgame. There is a difference between many false prophets and the singular false prophet of Revelation. Matthew allows a period where false prophets proliferate and lawlessness increases before the final unveiling reaches its full form. So we need to talk about the mystery of lawlessness. And Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2 that the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. That means lawlessness is already operating in a hidden, developing, or not yet fully revealed form. But Paul also speaks of the lawless one who will be revealed, and that gives two models of lawlessness. First, lawlessness as a mystery already at work. Second, lawlessness embodied in the man of lawlessness when he is revealed. And that's a distinction that helps clarify the sequence. Lawlessness can increase before the lawless one is revealed. Deception can spread before the final deceiver becomes publicly identifiable. False prophets can prepare the environment before the final false prophet administers the beast system. Now, this also helps us understand the Restrainer, and if you haven't seen my video on the Restrainer, I'll link it now. The Restrainer does not eliminate evil. The Restrainer does not eliminate deception. The Restrainer does not prevent every false prophet. The Restrainer does not prevent lawlessness from already being at work. And we know that because Paul says the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. So the Restrainer is not holding back all lawlessness in an absolute sense. The Restrainer governs the timing of the final unveiling. The lawless one is revealed only in the time Christ decides. That means preliminary deception, false prophecy, civil breakdown, and spiritual confusion can develop before the final revealing. But in the final phase, the full public manifestation of the lawless one and the consummate deception surrounding him, that remains restrained until God permits it. Jesus in Matthew also speaks of many false prophets. Revelation later speaks of the false prophet, and they are related categories, but they shouldn't be confused as being identical. Matthew's false prophets are plural and decentralized. They arise in an environment of apostasy, betrayal, lawlessness, and cooled love. Revelation's false prophet is a singular end-time figure. He performs signs, deceives the earth dwellers, promotes the image of the beast, and helps enforce beast worship. So the best reading is not to collapse them into a singular thing. The many false prophets are part of a preconditioning environment. The false prophet is the later consolidated administrator of the beast worship system. The earlier prepare the groundwork. The later singular figure organizes and intensifies the deception at scale. But there's more to this. Paul says the lawless one comes by the activity of Satan, with power, false signs, and wonders. Revelation tells us that demonic spirits perform signs and gather the kings of the whole world for battle. Revelation also repeatedly shows that evil powers operate only by permission. They are allowed to act. And this gives us a balanced view. False prophets and deceptive signs are not autonomous magic powers. They are energized by demonic and satanic agency. But even that agency remains under divine sovereignty. God permits, he limits, and he governs the timing. This is why deception can be very real and not be ultimate. The signs might be impressive, the deception is powerful, but none of it proves it comes from God, and none of it escapes God's control. The lawlessness in Matthew 24 most likely includes moral and civil breakdown, like I had mentioned earlier. After the apostasy, shared moral anchors begin to collapse. Betrayal becomes normal, hatred spread, love grows cold, false prophets provide a new narrative. People become more willing to violate what they once claimed to believe. That is what civil lawlessness looks like. It's not just people breaking laws in a technical sense. It's the breakdown of moral consensus and social trust. It's the environment where coercion, opportunism, accusation, betrayal, and fear become normal. And once love grows cold, people stop protecting one another. Truth is rejected. People become vulnerable to rival truth systems. And once loyalty fractures, people become easier to reorganize under new authority. And this creates a power vacuum. See, when apostasy hollows out truth, love, discernment, and covenantal fidelity, people don't become spiritually neutral. They become spiritually vulnerable. People still want meaning. They want safety and authority. They still want belonging. But now the old anchors have been severed. The vacuum can be filled by counterfeit authority. Civil lawlessness makes people long for order. False prophets offer religious explanation. Signs and wonders offer validation. And a strong ruler can appear to solve the chaos. In that way, the post-apostasy environment becomes a fertile ground for the later revealing of the antichrist, and lawlessness clears the terrain for counterfeit order. There may also be deeper spiritual dimensions to increased lawlessness that we haven't really touched on yet. The New Testament sometimes describes demonic rebellion as boundary violation. Jude says the angels did not stay within their proper domain, but left their proper dwelling. This gives us biblical category for lawlessness as more than social disorder. It can include social beings transgressing divinely assigned limits. That doesn't mean Matthew 24's lawlessness increased can be reduced completely to demonic signs. The primary meaning still includes moral and social breakdown, but it does leave room for a cautious hypothesis. As the end-time crisis intensifies, lawlessness may include heightened boundary crossing by spiritual actors, especially through false prophets, deceptive signs, and demonic empowerment. And that fits very well to the larger pattern of Matthew 24, 2 Thessalonians 2, and Revelation. So how does this all fit the larger sequence? Well, the larger sequence can be summarized like this. First, the apostasy comes and many fall away. Second, betrayal and hatred spread. Third, many false prophets arise and lead many astray. Fourth, lawlessness increases and the love of many grows cold. Next, deception intensifies, potentially including signs and wonders. Sixth is that the Restrainer still governs the timing of the lawless one's public unveiling. But seventh, at the appointed time, the Restrainer pulls away, and the man of lawlessness is allowed to be revealed. And eighth, the final centralized deception comes into full force. This model preserves both Matthew and Paul. Matthew explains the developing environment, and Paul explains the restraining timetable. Revelation shows the later consolidation and deception into the beast system and the false prophet. And this matters because believers should not assume that all deception begins only after the lawless one is revealed. Jesus warns that deception begins earlier. False prophets rise, lawlessness increases, love grows cold, communities fracture, signs and wonders may appear. And all of this can happen before the final public revealing. So the church must be discerning before the final crisis reaches its most obvious stage. The test is not just whether something appears powerful. The test is truth and allegiance. And the test is whether the message leads people to the Lord or away from him. Deuteronomy 13 remains relevant, that even if signs appear and happen, we should not follow it if it leads us away from God. So, in conclusion, Matthew 24 and 2 Thessalonians 2 fit together like different pieces to a puzzle. Jesus gives the developing social and spiritual environment, the apostasy, betrayal, hatred, false prophets, the increased lawlessness, and cooled love. But Paul gives the timing distinction. The mystery of lawlessness is already at work, but the lawless one is not revealed until the appointed time. Deuteronomy gives the sign test. Even a sign that comes to pass is not from God if it leads people into false worship. Revelation then gives the later endgame, the demonic signs, the beast, the image, the mark, and the singular false prophet who administers deception at scale. So, lawlessness increased does not mean that society just becomes more sinful in a general way. It means a post apostasy environment where truth, love, community, discernment all collapse under pressure, while deception and false prophecy expand. And the warning is serious. But the response that we should have is clear: love the truth, test the signs, reject false worship, and do not let love grow cold. And then we should endure to the end.